He handed me the mug with a weird smile. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. I didn't trust it. I don't know why, I mean it was just coffee. But something about the way he watched me lift it, like he was waiting for something. So, without a word, I turned and handed it to my sister-in-law instead. She laughed, called me paranoid like always, and took a sip. Less than 10 minutes later, she was on the floor, convulsing, gasping, her mouth foaming while we all stood frozen. And as someone screamed for an ambulance, I just stared at the mug. The one that was meant for me. But the truth of who it was meant for and who planned it shattered everything I thought I knew about my marriage. I never thought a simple cup of coffee could become the kind of weapon that shatters your world. But that morning, right after the mug passed from Callan's hand to mine, I realized I had been walking blind for far too long. My name is Eleonora Vale. I'm 34 years old, meticulous to a fault, and maybe a little too observant for my own peace of mind. 7 years ago, I married Callan, my once charming, magnetic husband who has, over time, become a ghost of the man I knew. Our marriage settled into silence, a cold distance that neither of us had the courage to bridge. Or maybe we just stopped trying. We live in a sprawling estate, perched on the edge of the city's wealthiest enclave, surrounded by manicured lawns and towering stone walls that keep secrets better than the people who live inside them. Callan's family is traditional, wealthy, secretive, and suffocating. The Vale estate is a world I was never truly part of, no matter how much I tried to fit in. Its halls echo with polite smiles and carefully worded greetings, words that don't always mean what they say. I'm still recovering, not just from the miscarriage that still haunts my nights, but from the way my life has been quietly slipping through my fingers, one cold moment at a time. Callan's family is large, but the person who drew the most attention wasn't me. It was Orelai, his younger sister. She's 28, the kind of woman who walks into a room and commands it without raising her voice. Everyone adores her, especially my husband's family. And everyone except me, I'm convinced. Orelai is the perfect daughter, the perfect sister, the perfect niece, and a perfect thorn in my side. There's a chill behind her smile whenever she looks at me, a subtle message I'm never quite sure how to decode. On that fateful morning, after Orelai collapsed, I couldn't stop seeing the coffee mug over and over in my mind. But even before that, there were signs. Small, quiet, almost invisible, things I pushed aside because I wanted to believe in the life I married into. The whispers started the night before. I was in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner, when I caught a glimpse of Callan's father and Orelai whispering in hushed tones by the doorway. Their conversation stopped the second I entered, their faces too carefully blank to be innocent. I lingered just long enough to hear the word problem, then the soft sound of footsteps retreating down the hall. Later, I found my personal diary open on the floor of the guest room, the one Orelai claimed was hers for the week. Pages torn, words half erased. A few entries gone, including one about my miscarriage. I asked her about it. She just smiled, said she found it and thought it was a little dramatic. I wanted to scream, but instead, I swallowed the lump in my throat. I started noticing the little things after that. The way my medication was sometimes missing, or my favorite scarf turned up in the laundry basket smelling faintly like her perfume. Food tasted different too, slightly off. A hint of bitterness in my morning tea that I thought was my imagination. The day Callan brought me that coffee was the day everything changed. He had that weird smile again, the one that doesn't quite reach his eyes. I should have said no. I should have walked away. But I was tired. I wanted normal. I wanted him to be the man I married. So, when I felt that tug of doubt, I didn't drink it. I handed it over to Orelai instead, hoping she'd laugh it off like always. But she didn't. She collapsed. And as I stared at the mug, now a silent witness to what almost happened, I realized I was the real target all along. If you've ever felt like you're the outsider in your own family, you'll understand the cold fear that sank in that morning. I began to see everything differently. The polite smiles, the whispered conversations, the way Callan looked at me now, with something unreadable, something dangerous beneath the surface. But who would want to hurt me?
Why?
And most terrifying of all, was I really safe in the place I called home? The answer was buried in the shadows of that estate. And I was about to uncover it, one horrifying secret at a time. The days that followed the coffee mug incident weren't just a nightmare. I felt like I was slipping through a fracture in reality, watching myself fall but unable to catch the pieces. It started slowly. At first, it was little things. Headaches that settled like a heavy fog behind my eyes, episodes of dizziness that made the room spin just when I tried to steady myself, and nausea that swallowed my appetite whole. I blamed it on the stress, on the way life in the Vale estate had become a tightrope walk over a pit of hidden snakes. But stress doesn't explain the way my heart would race for no reason, or the nights when I woke soaked in cold sweat, unable to breathe. I kept these symptoms quiet, telling myself I was overthinking everything. After all, who would want to hurt me? And if someone did, why? One evening, after a particularly brutal day, I sat across from my therapist, Dr. Marin. She was the one steady light I had, the only person I let see the cracks beneath my carefully polished facade. "You're exhausted, Eleonora," she said softly, folding her hands. "But I'm worried it's more than just anxiety. I want you to get some blood work done." Blood work. That word sent a chill down my spine. I agreed. The results were a shock. Trace amounts of a sedative, foreign to any prescription I'd ever been given, were in my system. Sedatives? Someone was poisoning me slowly. I didn't know who to trust anymore. Orly's face hovered in my mind, her smug smile from that morning. But could she really be capable of this? Or was it someone else entirely? And then came the news that broke my carefully maintained world even further. The Vale estate was undergoing renovations. The kind that would last weeks, maybe months. The kind that would force people to move around, share spaces they never normally would. And Aurelio was moving in. Temporarily. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. She said it was just until the renovations were done, but I could feel the shift in the air. She was invading my space. My home. At first, it was subtle. Small things out of place, scents that weren't mine lingering in my bedroom. A faint trace of her perfume on my pillow, on my scarf. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that I was being paranoid. Then I found a page, one of the missing pages from my journal, in the trash bin. The edges were torn roughly, the handwriting barely legible. Someone had been reading what I wrote, my most private thoughts, my grief, my fears. And worst of all, my medication. One morning, I caught a glimpse of my pill bottle, the seal broken, the contents slightly off. I didn't want to believe it. But the fear was now a living thing inside me, growing, twisting, suffocating. I confronted Callan quietly, hoping for some sliver of protection. His eyes flickered, something unreadable, but he said nothing. Days passed in a blur of suspicion and exhaustion. Then the morning of the second coffee incident came. Callan brought me a cup. That in itself was strange, he never did. The mug was warm in my hands, but the smell was bitter. Metallic. My stomach tightened. My pulse quickened. I wanted to refuse it outright. But instead, I let Orly reach for it, laughing, teasing me for being so dramatic. I handed it over without a word. Less than 10 minutes later, she collapsed again.
Twitching.
Vomiting. Unconscious. Panic exploded in the room. Callan was on the phone, dialing emergency services with shaking hands. The house was chaos, screams, running footsteps, frantic prayers. I stood frozen, the bitter coffee mug clutched in my hands like a loaded gun. The ambulance arrived, and paramedics rushed Orly to the hospital. Police came. Questions were asked. But the answers were nowhere to be found. The poison in the coffee was no accident. It was a message.
Who sent it? And why?
As I watched my sister-in-law wheeled away on a stretcher, the cold realization hit me. I was next. After Orly's collapse, the Vale estate was no longer just a place of quiet whispers and veiled glances. It became a battlefield. The police presence was intrusive, but their questions felt like scratching at a wall coated with decades of silence and secrets. "Callan, The man I once trusted with my whole heart grew colder still. His eyes, once warm, now held something jagged and unreadable. Every glance felt like a silent accusation or worse, a warning. But I couldn't back down. Not now. I was the target, and the game was deadly. Days blurred into a relentless chase for answers. I hired a private investigator, someone discreet, professional, because no one in that family would speak. The pieces started to fall into place in the most horrifying way. Callan's charm? A carefully constructed mask. His cold distance? A shield to hide darker intentions. The investigation uncovered something I never imagined: financial trouble, secret debts, and whispers of betrayal in the family business. But the real shock was this. The poisoning was a plan, not just to silence me, but to cover up a web of lies stretching back years. Callan wasn't just distant. He was desperate. And Orlai? She was his accomplice. The sister I thought hated me was in on it all along. I confronted Callan one evening when the estate was cloaked in silence. "Why?" I asked, voice trembling. He looked at me, not the man I married, but a stranger with cold eyes. "This family isn't what you think," he said. "You never belonged here. I tried to protect you from the truth, but you dug too deep." I could barely breathe. He told me about debts, betrayals, a planned takeover of the family company that would ruin innocent people. And me? I was a pawn. Then Orlai appeared, cold and unrepentant. "You should have stayed silent," she hissed. But I refused to be silenced any longer. I had evidence, emails, recordings, and the private investigator's report. I handed it all to the police. The arrests followed quickly. Callan and Orlai, once my family, were now facing charges. Justice was served, but it didn't erase the pain. I was left to pick up the pieces of a life shattered by betrayal. The dust had barely settled when the reality of everything finally caught up with me. I was alone in the great house, the halls echoing with silence where laughter once lived. The Vale estate, a place that had felt like a gilded cage, now felt hollow and cold in a different way. I stood in the living room, where memories hung like faded portraits on the walls. Every corner held a story. Every shadow whispered secrets I never wanted to hear. And yet here I was, alone, but free. The days after the arrests were some of the hardest I've ever faced. Friends and family, well, those who remained, offered condolences and hollow sympathies. The media called me the betrayed wife, the woman who uncovered a family scandal that shook the foundations of wealth and power. I didn't want the attention. I wanted peace. Healing isn't linear. There were mornings when the weight of betrayal pressed down so hard I couldn't get out of bed. Nights when tears soaked my pillow, not just for what was lost but for the person I thought I was, the naive wife who believed love was enough. But slowly, a new truth emerged. I was more than a victim. I was a survivor. Reclaiming my life became my mission. I left the estate, moving into a small apartment that felt like a sanctuary. I took up painting again, a passion long buried beneath the chaos. With every brushstroke, I reclaimed pieces of myself. Therapy became a lifeline. Dr. Marin helped me untangle the knots of grief, anger, and mistrust. She reminded me that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to live despite the scars. Forgiveness? I don't know if I'm ready. Not for Callan.
Not for Orlai.
But I'm learning to forgive myself. For staying silent too long. For trusting too deeply. For doubting my own instincts. What about justice?
They're facing the consequences, yes.
But justice isn't always clean or satisfying. It's messy. It's painful. And sometimes, it's just the beginning. I often wonder, would things have been different if I spoke up sooner? If I trusted my gut when I first noticed the small betrayals? If I hadn't let fear keep me silent? But regrets won't change the past. All I can do is move forward. And now I ask you, have you ever felt betrayed by someone you loved? Have you ever had to fight not just for your life, but for your truth? If so, you're not alone. And maybe, just maybe, sharing our stories is how we begin to heal. Thank you for listening. This isn't the end of my story, but it's a new beginning. What would you do if you found out someone close to you was trying to destroy you? Would you fight back or walk away? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.